Welcome back to this week's episode of Why Iowa, where today we're going to take a look at our rich history in the sport of wrestling.
Here in the heartland, this is the working man. These are the fields of dreams of American. No, you can't take that away, 'cause I want to stay here in the heartland. I'm here in the heartland.
Born on April 27, 1877, Frank Gotch was raised on a farm outside of Humboldt, Iowa, and he'd become the most popular athlete in America by 1910. As a young man, he would soon grow a reputation of being a tough, hard-nosed wrestler. And on December 18th of 1899, Big Rock, Iowa native Farmer Burns would come to Humboldt, Iowa, where he would challenge any man to last 15 minutes in the ring with him. He would pay them $25. Frank Gotch would accept that challenge, and he would make it 11 minutes before Farmer Burns would pin him. Farmer Burns was so impressed by Frank Gotch, he offered to start training him. Farmer Burns would begin training Frank Gotch in a style of wrestling called catch as catch can, and soon the two of them would be traveling all across Iowa winning matches. As his reputation and his development in the sport continued to grow, Farmer Burns would take Frank Gotch up to the Yukon, where they would challenge tough men and wrestlers in the mining camps, and soon Frank Gotch earned the title of the Champion of the Klondike. Upon returning to Iowa, Gotch would challenge the heavyweight wrestling champion of America, Tom Jenkins. And in 1903, the two would square off, where Jenkins would prevail. Now in a rematch that followed in 1904, for a title bout, Gotch would win the championship and would set his eyes on taking on the world heavyweight wrestling champion, George Hackenschmidt, the Russian Lion. The two would meet up in a title match on April 3rd, 1908, at the Dexter Park Pavilion in Chicago. Wrestling historian Mike Chapman will describe the match.
Hackenschmidt had an aura of invincibility about him. He came to America to take on Frank Gotch in Dexter Pavilion in April of 1908. Dexter Pavilion seated about 8,000 people. Hardly anybody thought Gotch could beat him. Gotch weighed about 198 to 200. Hackenschmidt was about 220. Gotch rope-a-doped him just like Muhammad Ali did to George Foreman in Zaire. He hung on him, he snapped him, he moved him around, he underhooked, he pushed into him. Hackenschmidt never got a chance to use his incredible bear hug and strength. Finally, Gotch took him down, and his favorite hold was the toe hold, which is extremely painful, and Hackenschmidt knew about it. Gotch started working on his legs and ankles and finally got it locked in. Hackenschmidt turned around on his stomach and looked at him and said, "Mr. Gotch, I surrender my title to you. Please don't break my leg." The town of Humboldt went crazy. Half the town was assembled around the town square. When the word, a guy came running out of the Western Union, waving a telegram, and said, "Our Frankie did it. He's the world heavyweight champion." A fire engine went around the square, clanging its bells. They set off a bonfire. The thing about Gotch, he never left Iowa.
As the new world heavyweight wrestling champion, Frank Gotch would travel the United States the next 3 years defending his title. President Theodore Roosevelt would invite him to the White House. And upon arriving at the White House, there just happened to be a Japanese jiu-jitsu expert also in attendance. Roosevelt would take the two men to the East Hall, where they'd roll up the carpet and he'd ask them to compete. And in a relative short amount of time, Frank Gotch would force his opponent to submit. On September 4th in 1911, a rematch was set, where George Hackenschmidt would challenge Frank Gotch at Comiskey Park in Chicago. Over 30,000 spectators would attend, making this one of the biggest attended sporting events in history at that time. Frank Gotch, in 30 minutes and multiple falls, would defeat George Hackenschmidt again. In putting him into his fearsome toe hold, George Hackenschmidt was forced to submit. Gotch would reign as the world heavyweight wrestling champion, defending his title 88 times. Before retiring undefeated in 1913. He'd become a household name across the country and the most popular athlete of the era. With marketing endorsements and the potential of a political run in the state of Iowa, unfortunately Frank Gotch would pass away of a kidney disease on December 16, 1917, at the age of 40. But his impact on wrestling will last forever. As a reminder to all our visitors, all Iowa students have free admission to the Iowa Hall of Pride thanks to Musco Lighting.
There's something about how Iowans think about wrestling, and it's something about how we approach the sport, and and I think we understand that it goes beyond just what happens out on the wrestling mat. When you hear Iowans talk about wrestling, they're intense about it. They understand it, but they know how much it correlates with every other aspect of their life. And I think, you know, when you look at the style of wrestling from an Iowa high school wrestler, they really pride themselves on being tough, on being persistent, on being resilient, where some other states, I mean, there's great wrestling all over the country, but they maybe pride themselves more on the technical part of it, which is really important. But I think in Iowan, you know, we get excited about seeing guys that are just playing tough on the mat, and we think, and I believe it, that if you can learn how to be tough on the wrestling mat, you know that that's going to carry over into every other aspect of your life, and I think that's at the heart of really what it is, and maybe it's maybe it's something that we feel like is a reflection of how we live on a day-to-day basis as Iowans. One thing I notice too, when I go to other states and you hear this, and maybe it becomes like cliche, but people are just friendly here, you know, and it's funny being in a sport like wrestling where on the mat it's competitive, you know, your job is to kind of beat that guy down and you know, maybe not like them as much as possible for 6 or 7 minutes, and then you go off the mat and people are so friendly, you know, and it's just a great place. Now that I have 2 girls, it's a great place to raise kids, you know, and you feel good. I can't imagine any other place I'd want to raise a family other than Iowa.
The Iowa Hall of Pride, through sponsorship by Mid-American Energy, has recently updated our wrestling display. From Humboldt native Frank Gotch to Dan Gable, discover Iowa's rich wrestling history. The first multi-taction table in Iowa was installed in our wrestling display, where you can learn more about Iowa's wrestling history through interviews, through interactive games, and through also wrestling trivia. Various wrestling artifacts on display, from vintage Riceville, Iowa wrestling warm-up to 4-time state champion Joe Gibbons medals. This year we'll add Cale Happel of Lisbon as the 28th 4-time state champ in Iowa. Whether you're learning about wrestling or you're looking for that motivation or inspiration for your wrestling career, you'll find that at the Iowa Hall of Pride through our interviews with Nick Mitchell, Jim Miller, Mike Chapman, and Dan Gable, and many other wrestling greats.
One, it's important to them, and number 2, they know how to work. And those are 2 ingredients that you need if you want to build that culture. And so, yeah, Iowa kids, it was a natural, you know. And Iowa kids understand how it is to want to be on a championship program. So it was a good fit both ways. Blue-collar work ethic for the most part, you know, and they love wrestling. The kids that come, it's a part of their nature. I want to wrestle. You know, is wrestling important to you? Coach, it's the most important thing. I heard that all the time. And so, yeah, it's special. And then you have the family get involved because it's special to them, you know. You have people in their community because it's special, you know, it's just, yeah, we love the Iowa kids.
I maintain the 2 greatest teachers of wrestling ever are Farmer Burns, who was born in Big Rock, Iowa, a town of about 30 people, east of Cedar Rapids, and Dan Gable. Those 2 people stand in my mind as the 2 people who taught wrestling better than anybody else ever.
I was always thinking about future competitions, and so that helped me keep me straight a lot. When a lot of kids would celebrate their championship, I don't know, I just was getting ready for another one, and that made a difference in my career as far as how far I could go. And I mean even beyond athletics, as far as an athlete. I think it helped me in coaching. I really think that it's harder to be a coach. If you get good in something and you're only responsible for yourself, then you can do that pretty easily. But when you got thousands of kids that you're dealing with, and you got to put those people and make them champions, it's harder. Because it's not you, it's them. They're actually doing the work. You're honing them, and you're getting inside their heads, and you're doing things for them, but it's them wrestling, not you. And so, if you have the ability to be really good at one thing, and you can do that, that's great. But if you can make a lot of other people good at something, then that's even more remarkable.
Wrestling historian and author Mike Chapman is a native of Waterloo, Iowa. He has written several books and several public speaking events talking about Frank Gotch and the history of wrestling in the United States. To learn more about Frank Gotch and other wrestling greats, check out Chapman's website at www.mike-chapman.com.